Hey everybody, delighted to have Lynette Zang, very popular guest, the founder and CEO of Zang Enterprises, by the way. There's been a lot going on in the market and she's raring to go. Lynette, what should people be talking about that they're not talking about right now as your take?
Well, there are a few things, but mostly what I'm seeing that nobody seems to be talking about is what's happening in the fintech area, which is that there was it's not it's Synapse, right? Closed, and they were tied to 22 banks, and there are upwards to 10 million people that have lost access to the funds in the banking system because inside of this whole system, how we're incestuously intertwined, those deposits that went into this fintech company were transferred through a whole bunch of different banks through hypothecation. So there's 85 million that's missing. But the point of that, not even that 85 million is all that much. Although if you're locked out of your funds, it doesn't matter how much it is, it's going to hurt you. But
Yes.
it is the fact that we are so incestuously intertwined, the funds are locked out. What happens if they should release those funds, if they open that door back in? Are we talking about 22 bank runs? And they might be smaller banks, but guess what? They're intertwined with the larger commercial banks as well. And the FDIC has no money, right? They had to bail out the regional banks that failed what in March, April of 2023, and they have not recouped that. So they even have just a titch over a penny for every insured dollar, let alone all the uninsured dollars. And I don't really hear anybody talking about this banking crisis that is unfolding right now. And frankly, Francis, at the same time that is happening, we've had a major 53-year-old pattern shift in the debt to gold ratio. And that is huge. That's 53 years. That's taking us back to when we transitioned in the US from a at least quasi gold backed currency to a fully debt based currency. And there is a structural change that's happening in the debt markets.
Tell us
So,
about that. Tell us about that. So you are, just for all the viewers that are less well versed than your good self, 53 years, Lynette's referring to 1971, which was the final severing of an already tenuous gold-back relationship to today, 2024. What's happening? What level have we crossed, Lynette? Why is this, what new dangerous territory are we wandering into here?
well, think about the fact that what supports any currencies, right? It is the full faith and credit of the government. So as long
Correct.
as you trust them, you have faith, you will continue to loan them money, extend them credit, right? So what supports a currency is the ability of governments to create more and more and more debt. And we've already seen that started to crack. These things don't happen just like that. They happen over a period of time, so people don't realize it. But it was already the end of 2000 when the Federal Reserve first started buying US government debt. Well, the 10-year treasury, the US government treasury, is the foundation of the global financial system, at least at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
there is so much to this story. But what that decoupling and that pattern shift means, and the fact that it is a structural change, is what supports money is now gone. I mean, it's gone. This structural shift is not something I'm waiting for. It's something that's happening right now. The general public can't see it because they're not really paying attention to it. But I've studied currencies and currency life cycles since 1987. And I'm telling you, when I saw that, I, I'm I'm prepared, right? I have my foundation in sound money, and I have food, water, energy, security, barterability, which for me is silver, wealth preservation, which is gold, community, and shelter, because these are the things we need to sustain a reasonable standard of living. But the system is falling apart, and we're witnessing it in the banking sector. You know what happened in 2023? Heck, what happened in 2008? Where those problems were not resolved, they were not fixed, they were just papered over, which actually makes those problems even bigger. And can you imagine? I mean, the Bank for International Settlements came out with a report just recently saying that sovereign debt, that's government debt, needs to beware, because confidence changes just like that. And that's what we are on the brink of. So these technical pieces are happening, whether you see them or you don't see them. However, when are you going to see them? When it's too late to do anything about it.
Yeah.
So we're seeing this in the banking sector through the Fintech, which basically is pretty much unregulated, but they are tied to the banking sector through these smaller banks, which are tied to the global banking sector through these larger banks like JP Morgan, et cetera. You have them coming out and, 31 banks passed the current stress tests. Isn't that awesome? We can
Yeah.
feel confident in them. But those big banks are coming out and saying the Fed stress test is opaque in areas they have no idea of how they come up with this, and they're wrong according to their own data on what their income is going to be through this stressful situation. And may I point out that in the previous stress tests, they never put in the fact that they were raising interest rates, even as they were raising interest rates.
Yeah.
Break the system.
Yeah. 100%. And we've had the sharpest rise right the way through. And the 10-year was actually up until this morning going up rather disorderly fashion as well, which is the bedrock of the debt foundation. And the banks are the intermediation system of the fiat and debt system. So what you're kind of saying, if I were to summarize it for those watching, is that while 85 million is small beer, it's a tip of the iceberg of something. It's a
Yes.
microcosm of what is probably happening in many times over in smaller banks right the way through to the primary dealer banks, the majors. And it is symptomatic of hypothecation and all forms of irregulation. Nobody knows who's really holding the ball. Everybody's got a claim to the ball, but nobody's actually got it in hand. And what we're actually talking about is that you're just getting a little flash, a peek hole through the bushes of the real monster behind there, and he's far bigger than most people have realized.
It's huge. It's not bailable.
Yeah,
In or out, it's not bailable.
yeah, yeah. Even if you steal from your depositors and you leverage government even further and monetize, it is just so vast that this is basically reset. Is the only conclusion that we can come to. We're going to have a burning of the accounting books and a start again moment. It's kind of the seventh year, isn't it? It's almost Shemitah-esque in terms of notion.
Yes, it is. And I mean, and nobody's really talking about this. And
Yeah.
it's like, because they don't really want the public to know. And even in an FDIC meeting that they had, what, last year or something like that, and they were laughing about the public not being aware of being at risk, their savings, the money in the banking sector being at risk. And it was not such a big problem because those large corporations that have all these attorneys and all of these, they'll understand the risk and be able to get into the proper position. But you and me, we are just the right size to fail, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah. And
Except
what
it
does this
becomes
bring? Carry on. Yeah, carry on. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I mean, that is the point of community. Community for me has probably grown to the largest part of my personal mantra, because while I've had all this time, 2008, I knew the system died, and I knew that food and water and all of these things become huge issues. So I sold my little 2-bedroom condo, And here I bought, this isn't that big. It's a half an acre in central Phoenix, but I became an urban farmer.
Yeah.
That's not what I really ever thought of myself as. And
Yeah.
now, since COVID, I have a bug out location and planted orchards and are preparing for there, because there is not one little doubt in my mind but that we are at the end of this currency's life cycle. And these transitions are not soft landings.
No.
They are not. Most people end up in abject poverty and they're starving. And when people are hungry and hopeless, well, that's when revolution begins, isn't it?
And they get desperate, absolutely. And being the prepared isn't good enough. You need to be able to protect that which you prepared and be remote. And you've made out, in great fairness to you, you have been discussing and dropping threads regarding prepping beyond just gold and silver investment many times that we've spoken, as we have done. And I think that's been very sound advice, and the smart will have acted, and those that haven't won't, but will possibly find the error of their ways and regrets. And to those listening who haven't yet, start now. Any action is good action. Start now,
Yes.
in terms of that.
Stop waiting. You can't see this, but think back to 2008. And Shearson was my alma mater. That's when I first became a stockbroker. That's who I was with. So I was paying very close attention to what was happening. And I was even shocked when Lehman went out, but it was because of all of the debt and the leverage that they have. And there's a lot more of that in the system today than there was back in 2008.
That's right. It's almost, it feels like already primed controlled demolition for which we're just waiting a signature event to put the foot on the plunger for all those structures to come collapsing in on itself. Talk to us a little bit about gold and silver, Lynette. It's one of your key, you mentioned beautifully, by the way, the bartering token of value retention in silver, the everyday man's money, and then the asset retaining value of gold. Go over that again, because just in that sentence, it's so loaded with meaning.
Oh, it's hugely loaded with meaning, especially when you put on top of that that global central banks are buying more gold than they ever have since the beginning of when they started tracking them back in the 50s, right? This is significant. 22, 23, and the first quarter of 24, that's the most current data I have on it. The most gold ever. And who knows more about what they're doing with this stuff than central banks, right?
Yeah.
So you follow their lead. But when you're talking about this, gold and silver are sound money. Physically in your possession, they are, according to the Bank for International Settlements, the central banker's central bank, the biggest, most important central bank in the world. Only gold is the only financial asset that runs zero counterparty risk. All this other stuff are contracts. And any contract, all these financial products, intangible assets, they all run counterparty risk, because any contract is only as good as the counterparty to that contract. So this is your foundation for maintaining your wealth, to have a properly diversified portfolio for anything that you're keeping in the markets or in intangible, because if you don't hold it, you really don't own it. And when that goes away, well, this is what saves you and recoups those losses. But you have to have the ability, and I think, Francis, haven't we been watching around the world this rise in hunger, this rise in the inability to feed the even Zimbabwe, right? Used to be the breadbasket of Africa,
Yeah.
and they've got 51% of their population that needs food aid. And that doesn't take into consideration the food aid that needs to go into the schools for the students. And that was the breadbasket. And in the US, I mean, a land of abundance. There are too many hungry people. It's ridiculous. So gold is the primary currency metal. Silver is the secondary currency metal. And both of these straddle everything, right? So, in other words, both of these are used in every single sector of the global economy. So, therefore, they have the broadest base of functionality of any asset, and really, equally as important, the broadest base of buyer. You go into the financial sector and it's used in one place, right? Now they've created a whole bunch of tools out of it for trading and making more of these so that every time they do this, what's already out there loses purchasing power value, which is what matters to you and me. Doesn't matter how many, I think I've got a $10 trillion Zimbabwe note here, but what can you buy with that? In Zimbabwe, I'm a trillionaire, but you can't buy anything with it.
Yeah,
So people get blinded by numbers and they miss it. But this is your foundation to protect any wealth that you've accumulated. But also, a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. So they
correct.
have artificially suppressed that price so that you don't see it. Yes, it's broken out recently. It has, and it will go much higher. I mean, I would imagine that we'd see 3,000 before the end of this year. But it is an election year, and there's elections that are going on all over the world right now. So I'm not quite sure in terms of Wall Street, because their job is not really to give you price disclosure. That's what it used to be.
Yeah,
Now it's simply a trading market, and everything, air, water, food, gold, silver, oil, everything, houses, real estate has been turned into a short-term trading instrument.
correct. Yes, there's a big difference between a true and honest price discovery mechanism and a casino. You know, where the duck shows up and wins in the cockfighting because the mafia bet on the duck. You better just bet on the duck. Don't even question how, because and these kind of distortions can come on, and the price discovery mechanism is gone. I want to show you an interesting tweet and also something we said in our Substack, which I think very much verifies a lot of what you're saying and is a bit of additional. And I'll take comment from you on it as well. If you'll just stand by, I'm going to go share screen on this one. So interestingly, we're talking about the Netherlands here. I'll
Mhm.
start with that, and that was the Dutch. Let's make sure I've got this. It was Jan Nieuwenhuis, which sounds like a good Dutch name. But the key thing that he was highlighting was essentially July the 2nd, which is only yesterday, the Central Bank of the Netherlands, DNB, invited 12 journalists to have a look inside its new gold vault at the Dutch army base near Zeist. DNB stores 190 tons, about 1/3 of its gold in this particular vault. The central bank states it invited the journalists to show the gold is there, how it is safeguarded and serves the assets of last resort, insurance. Journalists could bring cameras, but video images were provided. Couldn't bring cameras, my apologies. So no journalist could take their own footage, but footage was pre-provided on that. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but they would possibly say, well, we don't want to be robbed as their reason. And this was kind of the video or the image of going on. Isn't it funny, Lynette, that we're actually getting a government or a central bank in a quite fiscally astute nation? The Dutch typically are known for, you know, counting a penny and not being overly spendthrift and valuing sound money. Coming out, the central bank, and actually trying to prove that they have gold. And there was that aspect that the Dutch did get from the Federal Reserve. In fact, this tweet goes on to list all the different repatriations that occurred from starting in from America in 2014-ish. That was as during, I think there was a Malaysian airline that got shot down, and there was a lot of Dutch citizens. A lot of funny news anyway. But anyway, let's not stray into other topics. The Dutch coming out and saying, here's all the bits, we've got it back, and it's on Dutch territory again. Isn't it interesting how that's become important? We have the gold, and it's here.
Yep. I mean, I really, what I'm seeing is that on a global basis, the public is losing confidence in those that are in power, in those that have experienced this super high inflation. And so what I think that they're trying to do is make sure that that confidence is intact, because this whole fiat money game, I mean, it is just a con game. That's what it's about. And con games, and this is the problem, right? Con games really require two things. Confidence is number one,
Yeah.
but new money coming into this is number two. So when we see that shift in the bond market going into a structural problem, or a structural shift rather, and missing sound money versus debt money, right? That decoupling, what that's telling you is that their ability to create this is going down. And I think what that tweet was about, what that experiment was about, was, see, you don't have to worry about it because we have plenty of gold. And there is plenty of gold. It's just at where it's valued. And I would take a look at where that spot market is in the Netherlands, because my bet would be that it does not reflect the true value of gold for its most important function, which is to hold your purchasing power intact over time.
100%. And funnily enough, some comments were highlighting that the Polish did something similar. So I say there's never, central bankers don't put on jamborees and call in journalists unless there's already an issue. So what that tells
Yep.
me is that it's kind of like calling in the fire engines. There's also a fire. Typically people don't call in the fire engines unless there's already a problem. And my feeling is there must be a lot of undercurrents of dis-ease with the financial system generally in Holland as a whole, to the point that the Dutch would do this. And people are commenting that the Poles have done similar to it. But some other people are also pointing out that the total gold valuation is around 2% of the claimed GDP, which means that it's not maybe as well backed as many people think. So what's your take on that side of them? Do they really have enough, or is it just, or will price fix everything? That
Oh,
2% quickly becomes 20% if it goes 10x, for example, or beyond.
well, remember, all of these central banks have a gold revaluation account, right? So it's pretty easy for them to revalue. But I know that what we're seeing in the US, and I haven't looked at the Netherlands, but my guess would be that's why they did it. But South Korea, and China and many parts of the world, we're watching a groundswell of the public piling into gold, starting to buy gold. So people are feeling very, very uncomfortable. The general public is feeling very, very uncomfortable. Even though I haven't looked yet, my bet would be that would be true. And also, just because they have that gold there, it doesn't mean that the currency is backed by that gold,
No,
right? It's
not at
not.
all. No.
It's backed by the government's ability to do this.
Yes.
That's what it's backed by.
They're
And
trying
so,
to get the value, they're trying to juxtapose the presence of the gold as meaning that the faith-based system is actually in better standing than it is. The two are mutually exclusive and have nothing to do with each other. That's such an important point you make. The other interesting point, just as a little bit of a skeptic, is they've shown 1/3 of their reserves. They didn't take the journalists simultaneously and show them the vault with the other 2/3. So you've got to say, well, if you want to do a big expose of all the gold you own, why not show it all on the same day? In all the different locations, especially if you're not allowing people to do videos and you're providing PR friendly videos, because it's kind of then, well, I've only seen 1/3. Maybe that's all there is. So yeah, that's a little bit of interesting gossip, I suppose, and a bit of possibilities, probabilities, who's know. I want to take you to something else. And I'm going to bring back the screen share again. And this was something you've touched on already. I knew you were going to do this because you're smart that way. But in terms of what's actually happening is there's divestment occurring in terms of the T-bills. And there's accumulation, particularly in the East. This was a tweet Ottavio Tavicosta tweeted out, and it's one I've lent on. It's in our Substack. We've highlighted it. And there's a couple of things that go with this. I'm going to show a couple of images. People understand images so much more than text, and they don't read as much as they should. So I like images for that reason. But the divergence of China's holdings of US treasuries being the red line over here on this blackback chart, and the gold price, and I expect largely driven because the central bank of China was one of the big accumulators recently. So you have the white line going quite strongly up. Some would even argue getting not far off parabolic on this bigger time frame. And you have the red line accelerating in its downward trajectory, which could involve both this divestment and also loss of value. It's important to point out loss of value as well. Because there's quite a few dollar bulls that are very proud of the fact that the dollar has been strong because they've gone out front on the interest rates, the milkshake guys. But we tend to highlight that when you raising your rates faster than everyone else, actually your debt has devalued. This chart over here is the 30-year bonds have declined nearly 45% since the peak of April 2020, the largest 4-year loss in over a century in loss in value. So you can't have it both. There's that debt and that fiat element. And everybody talks the currencies, but they forget to talk about the debt. If you're going to release the pressure of your Ponzi scheme through your debt system, you can have a firmer currency, you can run your rates up, but then your bonds are going to be losing value. That affects pensions, that affects all people that have been the holders, the bag holders on that. And then you have the Japanese on the opposite side that are trying to protect their debt, barely raising rates, but their currency is being used as the release valve, and you're having an absolute binge. Some people think one is superior to the other, when in actual fact, both are just deflating, trying to taper or deflate a Ponzi scheme and just using the different valve where you have two options really, and both are going to fail. What's your take on this whole scenario? Is there any national pride to be had? I'm kind of a little tired of the least dirty shirt in the laundry argument, when you are actually looking at a debt market that is, of the first world nations, is actually had the biggest fall because you had the highest rates. What's your take on this whole discussion? Because there's quite a bit of discussion and I think some misinformation in all of that. Is there any national pride to be had here?
Well, you know, I don't have national pride in the way things are being handled at the government level or the Federal Reserve level. I never get political. I stay economic. And so I don't think there's any national pride. And to your point, what you're talking about with the strong dollar is one weak currency against another weak currency. And so, in theory, when the interest rates are higher, that attracts more buyers of that currency. But also, to your point, let's go full circle back to the banks again, because for 15 years, those interest rates were held at zero. And so they accumulated all of this debt. This is interest rate, this is market value of the bonds. So what happens is they raise this rate, and to your point, the loss of 50% on the 30-year bond, but all of their debts, their mortgages, the auto loans, the credit cards, all of the funny things that the products that have been created, they're all flipping underwater. And so they can't afford to run, because if they sell off their holdings, they're selling it into a down market. And what will that do? That will push that market down even more. And so the global plumbing is rusty, really, really rusty. And it's so rusty that good stuff is having trouble to get through, which is why you need this. And you also brought up China. Let's talk about the BRICS, because there's a whole new system of plumbing that is being built around the digital currencies. And so once that is completed, I mean, I don't know, how fast do you turn off one system and turn on the other system? And
Yeah.
SWIFT is pedaling as fast as they can to remain relevant. And for those that don't know, SWIFT is the global a payment system that's really run by the US and is used as a weapon. You don't like what you don't like, or we don't like what you're doing, boom, you're out of the system. So I mean, you brought up a point earlier, and I agree with you so much. And the way you were talking, what it sounded like, and I think this is probably the reality. I can't quite prove it, so it's an opinion. But are they not creating or attempting to create this controlled demolition? And what makes you think that they are going to be able to control it, or that they do need a big enough crisis that scares people enough to accept whatever they want to shove down our throats moving forward, right?
Yeah,
That's why
yeah,
the local community part is critically important, because we all saw what happened during the cerveza crisis in 2020 when the grocery store shelves were bare. But for those that have been paying attention, they've never fully recouped, right? So it might look like the shelf is full, but you move one thing and you see there's nothing behind there, right? So we're still definitely we're in at such a vulnerable, precarious position that you have to be as self-sufficient and independent as possible. This is your foundation, but now you can use silver as a tool of barter. So I can buy strawberries, I can buy, a tank of gas. That's what even current history shows us. This protects you from this. I
yeah.
mean, it really is that absolute devaluation, because I'm also convinced, because of what I'm seeing in the money supply, the velocity of the money supply, that has been tracking down. I mean, worse than it was during the Depression in 33. I mean, by far, since 97, that peaked. So for me, that was the ability of taking on more debt to actually be stimulative to the economy. Since 97, that has been tracking down in a very, very pervasive way. But now we see a spike up. A little spike is nothing. A pervasive spike tells me that that loss of confidence of the public, meaning they're getting rid of dollars as quickly as they can, because that's the problem with rapid inflation. So on a global basis, community, let's have our own revolution, because if we don't do something, we are not going to have a seat at the table. And you know how to have a nice peaceful revolution? You just convert this garbage, fiat money, debt money, into sound money, into savings based money,
Yeah,
because this is going into this battle with a bazooka. This is going into this battle with absolutely nothing.
yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, no,
Nothing.
100% agree. And like you say, you can rage against the machine, and sometimes I'm probably as guilty of this as anyone else. Primal social media or primal screen therapy rooms for padded cells for you to yell your head off and say how terrible the world is and beat your fists. The way you move forward is you don't wait on them. They are not your orchestrators. You build your own system, and you have to do it ground up. That is local. And that's what you've been doing. And I like that about you. I like your message, and I like that you live your message and you enact your message. And we are doing something similar. Optionality. So we like multiple jurisdictions. There is a bit of a West. It's not to say, America will to be totally destroyed, but there is a bit of a West. I remember looking at a population diagram that had the West was here and the East was there, and it showed the population. Most of it's in the East. In fact, there's a circle that gets the bottom half of China and Indonesia, and it's quite a small circle, rest of the relative of the world. And they say here 50% of the global population is in here, capturing Southeast Asia largely. And it showed also the relative incomes. And most of the world is like this, with that huge bulge of population. And here we were super low population, but we were the high relative and there's a great leveling. This is the harshest downdraft is actually coming for the nations of financialization of everything. for which the City of London, obviously, the UK, which gave up all forms of manufacturing, went services, financial. Everybody's a lawyer in the derivatives industry or a trader or whatever. And also, unfortunately, New York is built on that, in LA, and all of that. So I do think the middle America might well do better. But there is also the value to having optionality outside of the West generally, as well as getting local in your own community. Do you see that, or
I definitely do see that. But I don't know, the middle of the country might fare a bit better, but the problem is the advantage that the US has had all these years is the world reserve currency, creating an artificial demand for the dollar, which has been declining very, very substantially. Don't hold me to this because I don't have the data, and you might know this better than me, but I believe it went from 70% of total global trade, and I think we're at 49% the last time
yeah,
that I saw it. That's a pretty substantial move downward.
yeah,
But remember, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has a substitution fund set up, and they tested it. It works. So anybody that's holding any dollars or dollar denominated instruments like bonds or anything else can deposit it into that substitution fund, and then the IMF can convert it into those instruments that are denominated in SDRs, which is
SDR, yes,
internal currency, right? So that means that, I mean, in theory, then they could regulate the speed at which the dollars return to the US. But in reality, I don't that's never been attempted, and people think that, and maybe even central bankers think that they are gods, but they are humans. And I think it should be really obvious how many either planned mistakes or just naive mistakes. Who could, unintended consequences? Who could have known? Well, you're supposed to be the smartest guys in the room and you're sitting around talking about this. You guys should have looked at all the different possibilities to know. So that's who's driving this bus. But, they do need, look, you look at the purchasing power, and I don't care what currency you're looking at, it is officially very close to zero. Well, what do you do when the purchasing power gets to zero? You steal principal while you're still in the system. That's what the test on negative rates was all about. What are the cryptocurrencies? And let's not mince words. What is a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, but a cryptocurrency, a programmable currency? And what do they say? They say, number one, if you give us this, we can have our finger on the economy 24/7, moderating, moving it as they deem fit.
yeah,
And they say there are no limitations to how low they can push interest rates, meaning you've got a bank account and you're watching it decline, the principal decline, even though you're not spending money.
yeah. That's
Guess what
right.
you're
And you know also that you're not in a negative inflation rate environment either. You're actually sitting in a real inflation rate environment where you're watching government-based supplied services continue to escalate, and utilities and municipalities and various other costs. 100%. I mean, the amount of control, it would be so draconian. It would be the ultimate. I mean, there will be ascendant to godliness virtually, one step removed. And that's, I think, what makes them salivate so much for so much for this potential eventuality.
So we have to battle that, right? I mean, look, I'm old. I'm going to be 70 in a couple of months. And so I think I'll be around for another 30 years after that. I think I'm going to live to be 100. But I have
Well, look, a
children.
day over 55, Lynette.
Thank you so much. I love you. but but I have children in their 40s. I have grandchildren. My grandson's birthday is on Saturday and he's going to be 11. And then eventually, hopefully I live long enough, I see them have babies. It's for all these generations coming up. It's for all of our kids, our grandkids, our great grandkids, and on and on. Because if we allow them to have their way, and I can't guarantee that we're going to be successful, but I can tell you that I look at myself in the mirror, and I wish everybody would do this right now. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, if not me, who? And if not now, when? And
When?
I just got chills, right? We have to come together because as an individual, you're right. There's only so much that you can do. You know, are you really going to impact it? Getting
Yeah.
local. I just recently joined Citizens for Sound Money, which is about helping states legalize silver and gold, but then it also goes global. So,
Love
you
it.
know, I mean,
Send us
never
the link to that, by the way. We'll share that as well.
excellent, excellent. We will. Let me just mark that down. Because we've got to make a difference. And in my wildest dreams, I never thought that I would be getting into politics. But here I am at 70 years old, just creating a global corporation because this has to be global. It has to be, and getting involved in this. Maybe I'll live to be 130. Who knows?
Yeah, well, the science is coming fast. The AI bots will do all the hard lifting for us, Lynette. We won't put our backs out anymore. So, give us your 5 point plan. I think you have already in the beautifully and eloquently already. But if I were to summarize, it sounds like get started on your local prepping, which means community, self-reliance, food, water, fund balance sheets, gold, transactional silver. Get engaged in people that are putting forward the principles of sound money. Again, locally, forget about achieving anything at the top. It's all sewn up. They've got to rot and break, and then the local power, when they go ground up again, will be there, and you'll be the last man standing, or your group of communities will be the ones organized and with a voice when it comes. Get rural and get some optionality, maybe across border as well, where the West is vulnerable. Do you have any places internationally? And this, I see you. I think you've got your plan pretty much in place, and I think it's a very good one. But are there places internationally that people could look into that you think are going to do better? Who do you see? Because there's so
Oh,
much that has to crash. There's so many things that has to fall. There's never bear markets without something else getting the flight capital. So
right.
yes, we know gold, silver, but in a nation state sense, who's going to be getting the best people from the nations when there's this big flee from the West? Where's the money flows? Because I've always felt if you understand the money flows and the talent flows, you know what's next and where it's coming. Where's the technology, the Silicon Valley going to be of 30 years' time?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea about that. I know that as in 2020, I saw where my hole in my strategy was. So I bought a bug out property. It took a little while to find one that was remote enough. And we're setting up a community there to feed 40. And so I'm trying to attract, and we have doctors, we have engineers, we have farmers, we have carpenters, we have electricians, we have mechanics. So I don't know that there's really going to be any one place that is better than any other. Maybe ones that have more community established, which they do more in Europe than they do, and maybe some of the Eastern European countries, to be honest with you, are more community oriented. But I'm kind of building my own community, and I'm encouraging people because you have to be able to get to it too. I
Yeah.
think we might have maybe a 6-day window when the
Chaos.
system breaks before the public knows it. So where I am, I can be there in 2 hours. And if I had to walk there, I have the path to walk there. I can't tell you another country that I think is going to be better off because I think this is going to be painful for everybody. But you made such a valid point in that wealth never disappears. It merely shifts location. And so the goal becomes also to have that wealth shift your way, because there really are always opportunities in crisis. And for me, this is where the opportunity is going to go. There's no fever like gold fever. It is still severely, severely, severely undervalued. And right now you have this down here, you have those income producing assets way up here, severely overvalued. That's going to flip flop. So if you hold your purchasing power intact, you're going to have the opportunity to accumulate those income producing assets when they are severely undervalued. And I think you can do that anywhere in the world, quite honestly. So I think wherever the educational system is really strong, that would attract people. I know that a lot of people, I wish I could verify, and maybe I'll try and do this, to have a dual citizenship. You can do it in Italy, you can do it in Portugal, you can do it in a lot of places in the world. You can do that. So to your point, I think it's a good idea to have dual citizenship and have another location. I'm just not sure that we will have enough time to get really far away
Yeah.
when this whole thing cracks. I feel like you need to do whatever it is that you're going to do well ahead of time. And for me, because of my children and my siblings, I still have brothers and sisters that are alive that I feel obligated to help and take care of. I wanted to be very close so that I could get there. They could get there. We could even take a helicopter.
Absolutely. No, you are absolutely right. There's responsibilities. I'm not for a minute setting everyone should cut and run and try get to the other side of the planet. There's practicalities to that as well, and there's people that rely on you, and you're serving them, and 100%. So it makes absolute sense. You have to make the safe haven somewhere where you can get all the sheep into the kraal. I don't want to say sheep. Let me say the family can be herded together. But yeah, that makes
And not
absolute
just
sense.
family. I mean, they're all different kinds of family.
Yeah,
So, you look, and even as you're building your community locally, I mean, go to a farmer's market, right? And
yeah,
and start to look for people with that have different skill sets and volunteer. Go, I guarantee you, every farmer could use an extra hand or two. Every single
100%.
one, you know, and
And learn
and so
something. Yeah. What useful lessons. I'm a victim of being this modern generation man. My father was a man who made things out of wood, great engineer. He could fix cars. He could do so many things. Those guys are going to become fashionable again. They're going to become high valuable again. People that can grow things, do stuff with their hands, physical toil, fixing, making, amending, growing. They're going to become super useful. And it's time to skill up there. Otherwise, you're going to be a low status a citizen in the new local community. Lynette, really enjoyed this conversation. We've got to respect your time. Tell us how people that have enjoyed and would like to engage with you, maybe even discuss some things about prepping. You've mentioned, without getting too specific, Arizona area.
well,
How
I
can
get
they
very
engage?
specific. My urban farm is in dead central Phoenix. So I'm kind of easy to find. And I have a lot of talent around me. I've been able to accumulate a wonderful community, and we really are all here to be of service. So in any of the areas of the prepping, I have people that can help people. And we're getting to the point where we're going to be showing that more and more and making it more and more and more accessible. But you can find me at LynetteZang.com. YouTube and Twitter are at the Lynette Zang. Instagram and Facebook are at Lynette Zang. And I love our phone number, 833 GLD ZANG. So that's 833-453-9264. And, we are really all here to be of service with whatever it is that you need. Yes, we can position you into a sound money strategy. I've studied currency since 87, and these are all what we're seeing. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon your perspective, these are all just a repetition of history. And so history tells you, if you know the patterns, like my grandson's turning 11, pretty sure nobody's looking at him and going, oh, he's going to be 70. Just like you're not looking at me and thank you for the 55, but you're not saying I'm going to be 11, right? So everything has a life cycle. Currencies do too. That's what I try and teach and show you, these pattern shifts, so that you can make educated choices that put your best interest first. And honestly, the best thing to do right now is create that local community around you and join this global revolution of sound money so we can have a seat at the table. And that's easy, just to convert this junk into sound money.
Love that. And do send us those links you also mentioned. We'll put those in the notes as well as your website. Lynette Zang, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was great.